Let's go to this now. In the past, we've seen auditing firms embroiled in scandals where they've also had to be issued with fines in some of these cases. Now, to try and remedy this, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says has in fact increased the maximum monetary penalties for both companies as well as individuals. And this, he says, will allow the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors to impose bigger fines. Now, the fines could be as high as 25 million rand. Let's now speak to independent political and economic analyst Khaya Sithole, who joins us live now. Jobe, thank you so much for your time this evening. Given what we've seen unfold in the sector, particularly as well in the State Capture Commission, how far do these new penalty figures go towards addressing misconduct issues in the sector? Jobe, I'm not sure if you're able to hear us.
Yes, I can. Good evening, and good evening to the listeners. So the penalties that have been announced by the Minister of Finance actually represent the culmination of a series of steps that have been undertaken by the Board of Auditors in order to sort of try and find the right balance between the type of sanctions that are available versus the nature of the transgressions that we've seen in recent high-profile cases. So obviously, for a lot of people that talk about a Steinhoff scandal, for example, the idea that somebody could only be fined 200,000 rand in relation to an offence, given the damage that they caused not only to pensioners but to the economy at large, it represented a mismatch. So what simply this process wanted to do is to update that particular penalty regime to something that serves as a deterrent against bad conduct from auditors. Now, of course, there's always going to be the academic debate on what the right number is, but I do think that the numbers that have been cited do sort of give that sense of chill or that sense of fear for those that would otherwise commit misconduct, to simply say to them that the consequences are going to be dire.
And the debate, as you say, has been quite fierce on whether or not these particular numbers, the figures that have been increased, are enough, particularly when you look at, sometimes the grand scale of misconduct in and itself and the monies that are involved there.
Yeah, so one of the great difficulties that any regulator has is that they have to regulate for the market at large rather than for specific cases and for specific outliers. So, of course, when we talk about the billions that are lost in Steinhoff, that does not represent the nature or the size of an ordinary company out there. So, of course, once the penalty regime seems to be completely at odds with what the market is all about, then you find that the regulator does lose a sense of legitimacy. What we also need to be able to be clear about is that the numbers that we cite and the numbers that we see in the Gazette represent the maximum. So there's going to be a spectrum of different penalties. And I think what this does is that it enables those that are responsible for the disciplinary and the sanctions processes, the Auditors Board, to be able to say that, look, in some particular cases, we do think that the harm that has been done to society warrants something much larger than the traditional 200,000 rand penalty. So what that simply does is that it widens the scope for the nature of penalties that we're going to see. But you're unlikely to see a large number of fines that are based at the maximum limit, because there's going to be many more considerations before a final sanction is issued.
And going back to something you said a little earlier on, would you say then that given these particular developments, they've struck the balance somewhat?
So there is another tension point that has emerged in that, obviously, because now we know what the maximum penalties could be, it would simply mean that if you and I wanted to run an audit firm, for example, or wanted to run an organization of a similar stature, we have to have at the back of our minds the fact that we need some element of insurance protection, for example. So that professional indemnity must also be built with the understanding that if we have a number of clients and something goes wrong across all clients, the worst possible sanction could be this particular number multiplied by all of those. Can we find an insurance company that's willing to actually give us that professional indemnity? So
all right. Khaya, I'm not sure if you're still there. It looks like, of course, that connection is not the greatest. We're trying to see if we can just get him on the line as we finalize this particular conversation. I mean, you think about, some of the details that emerged in the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, for example, talking about some of these auditing firms, what came out, but the big one, Steinhoff, you think about the developments there and how that case is still moving at a snail's pace. And a number of people have been talking about these maximum, penalties that have been imposed, whether or not they're enough, particularly when you think of some of the large amounts of monies that are involved in this one. But at least we get a gist of what all of this is about. Thank you so much to independent political and economic analyst Khaya Sithole.